everyone. Welcome. It is episode 4 of this new adventure called Humans on the Verge podcast. And welcome. If this is your first time listening, so glad you're here. And for those of you who have subscribed, hit the follow button, all that good stuff, thank you for coming back. I truly appreciate your presence and your attention because in these interesting times, presence and attention is a challenging thing right now. So, and I'm even today having a little bit of a challenge with both of those things. So this is what I like to call my Ponderama episode. And what I like to do in these episodes is sit a little bit with the episode before, which is a conversation that I've had with someone. In this case, it's a conversation with Steve McIntosh, who is a developmental philosopher. And he and I discussed his book, Developmental Politics, How America Can Grow into a Better Version of Itself. And he and I, we just barely scratched the surface of all the goodies that this man brings to the table. But what we did scratch, I will unpack a little bit today. We'll do a little ponderamming about that, creating a new verb. Yay, me. Maybe that'll be my legacy. Who knows? So we'll do that today. And just wanted to also say that I am recording this on March 14th, 2025, and wanted to recognize that for those of you who possibly listened to episode 3, and I highly recommend it if you did not, that Steve and I spoke and talked about developmental politics, integral philosophy, and the state of America in December of 2024. The election had happened, and so we were still in December when we did not know anything yet about how things would unfold in this particular Trump presidency. So that's why we were talking about things very much in a kind of a larger worldview perspective, which is what Steve does anyway. And it's why I had him on, because I wanted to introduce these higher worldviews to you, and particularly the ones that he discusses, which are the 3 main worldviews of American politics, which is traditionalism, modernism, and postmodernism. I'm not going to go into all of that. Please listen to the episode if you want to talk about that. But I am going to talk a little bit about my own journey and my own wrestling with this stuff, and then certainly my own wrestling the last 2 months, which is really what's going on. And I think I'll just probably start there. So, it's been interesting, right? We were all in, let's wait and see kind of a thing. And then here in LA, right away in January, we got the fires, which was very distracting and very disruptive and very traumatizing to those of us who live in LA. I was not directly affected by the fires. I was in a small way. The barn I ride at was, the stables burned down. We got all the horses out. We got some of the equipment out. And it was a place that I love and adore. It's called Will Rogers State Park, Historical Park. But the part of town on the west side here, where I grew up, that was under threat, the Palisades and Brentwood and Malibu, are all places that I lived in since I was not 8, my whole life, basically. So it was just very, very traumatizing. So we had that, and I had that in particular. And then, of course, later in the month of January, we had the inauguration and all of that. So we've been dealing with things for 2 months now here in America. And I really do lean into Steve and the integral perspective in order to help me navigate these things. a couple of things that I've been particularly doing, like many of us, was I pretty much after the election, I just stopped watching the news. And, it's so interesting because for many of us, I grew up as a news junkie. There was always a TV on in my household growing up. My dad was very much a news junkie. My mom always had something on the TV. So being an informed citizen was always important to me. And of course, mainstream media, no matter which channel you're watching, is not always the best way to be fully informed. You're really only being partially informed, of course, as we all know that. And then social media, it's just a total clusterfuck. So one of the things I mainly wanted to do, though, differently in this era was to regulate my nervous system better this time, and was more prepared for that. And I think a lot of us are more prepared for that. And that's a good thing. We've actually learned something about that. So part of that was getting off of the daily drip drip of news, which is more, not so much drip drip, but is panic, panic, panic. And that is one way to feel about that. And as Steve and I talked about in the episode, if you have a postmodern perspective, this particular world we're in right now is panic. And even for the modern perspective people who, who have, who are more free market, capitalist, individual freedoms, all that kind of stuff, which we talked about a bit about in the podcast. It's we're not living in a liberal democracy right now, and we probably haven't for a while. And that's the interesting thing and I don't want to get into that today, but I was just watching a gentleman on a news show, a pretty grounded news show, and he was talking about the ways that both parties have been manipulating the constitutional kind of setup of Congress, the legislature, how both parties have been manipulating that and the executive branch for quite a while in service of their own agenda. And he talked about how 25% of each party pretty much is okay with autocracy as long as the autocrat is aligned with your own personal values. And I really, I thought about my conversation with Steve, and I was like, yeah, because those people who are really, what we're talking about here is the postmodernists, who is like, well, as long as you are on our team, we'll vote for you, and we'll just ignore anyone else's needs. And then there's we're calling that, when Steve and I talked, the traditional wing, which is the conservative wing of American politics right now. They too are okay with autocracy as long as it serves their values. And I'm not going to go into the value list and all of that kind of stuff. Really, really recommend read. If you're into this and want to know more, read Steve's book, Developmental Politics, because he really dives into this stuff. But I really thought about that. I thought about like how I remember even myself was like, yeah, fuck those other people. I want my values only. And, it's really come to bite us in the ass. So, anyway, getting back to what I've been doing here, which is I have been regulating my nervous system. I have been working on not watching the news. And really what's that has helped me do is to step away from the narrative that everyone is selling. And so that's been a good thing. Walking away from the narrative is a good thing. And that gets me to the next practice that I've been doing, which is really the witnessing practice, which is about learning to watch your mind, watch the thoughts of your mind. So mindfulness practice is the basic one. And the cognitive science behind this, you guys, is huge. I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole right now, and I won't, but I just have to say the last 6 weeks, and I will put this in the show notes, I have been inside the cognitive scientist John Vervaeke's world. And he's got a beautiful series on YouTube. It's 51 hours long. broken up in smaller bits. He's from the University of Toronto. He's a cognitive scientist, but he's also a man who has studied and been a mindfulness practitioner, and he's a Tai Chi practitioner. And he's the name of this series is called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And what Steve and I talked about around values and virtues and meaning, it's all tied in. It's all part of a bigger conversation about how we understand what we feel matters and is important. And John talks a lot about what Steve talks about when it comes to values and virtues also. They're both kind of Neoplatonists. And I'm not a big Greek philosopher person, and I'm just kind of learning this kind of stuff, but happy to share what I do kind of understand here, and and just happy to be part of the conversation because it's really helping me. But these witnessing practices are so essential, and I've been doing them for about 25 years. And the main thing that they help you with is they help you see and disconnect from the narrative that you tell yourself all day. When the basic mindfulness practice is to sit and focus your attention, your present moment attention, on your breathing. That's the basic one you do. There's lots of different ones you can do, but that's the basic one we teach in Vipassana meditation. And when you do that, what happens is if you're a beginner, anywhere from 20 to 25 seconds in, your mind begins to wander. And then what I hear from a lot of beginning people, or people even I suggest mindfulness practice to, they say, oh, I don't know how to do it. I'll never be able to do it. But I can't keep my mind empty or blank for very long. So they think they're doing something wrong. The reality is that's exactly what your mind is built to do. Mind wandering is an essential part of your cognitive ability and how your mind and brain integrates new information. Because constantly what your mind is doing is searching for what is relevant information in the environment or in relationships or in anything you've learned to yourself, which means therefore to your survival. So what happens is you'll focus on your breathing, and then suddenly I always say, you go off to Disneyland for 5 minutes, because it's generally going to be some sort of working through or a story or a future fantasy or a past kind of working through something that absolutely you're the star of the show. You're the protagonist of your own story. And in that mind wandering, that makes sense because you're trying to find the relevant information for you. So of course you're going to be in the story all the time. Well, that person said this and it affected me this way, and I need to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm freaking out that I'm going to do this. Whatever it is, it's I. And the point of these witnessing techniques, which every person on earth should be studying right now, and every child in schools and anywhere should be learning, is to get to watch the I movie. And that's not an Apple product, by the way. To watch the self-centered, narcissistic movie in your head, which is perfectly normal. I'm not judging that. We don't judge it. But it's about learning to witness it, because when we can witness it, we can get some distance from it. And when we get some distance from it, we can question its reality. We can test reality around it. So this practice is important and connects right to the conversation I had with Steve, because in these times of very politics, right? Everyone hates each other. It's all tribalism. And there's about 4 tribes, basically, the way Steve and I talked about it. I'm just going to look in my book here because I did bookmark this. There's the very socially conservative group, and they're socially conservative modernists and traditionalists. So there's those people, and generally they're patriotic. They love America. They champion Judeo-Christian heritage and focus on the family. I mean, there's even a group called Focus on the Family, very conservative. They encourage ethnic assimilation, so, removing the differences so that but they do it in service of upward mobility, like you need to blend in order to come into the marketplace of the system. They stand against threats to Western civilization, which is interesting because we'll get to that in a minute. And they promote industriousness, proportionality, and equitable just desserts. So if you earn it, you get it, kind of mentality. But that's one of the tribes. And then the other tribe is the fiscally conservative and libertarian modernists. They protect sovereign rights of individuals to think and act as they choose. They champion limited government, private property, and personal privacy. They champion spontaneous order that arises from the free markets. And they promote entrepreneurship, economic self-sufficiency, and balanced budgets. And they protect individual freedom from interference by the collective. Now, what's interesting about this is that when I think about myself immediately with those two categories right there, I see some things that are important to me too, that I could absolutely say yes to. So immediately that makes me see like, oh, I don't, normally those people drive me crazy a little bit, but I can also see how individual liberty is really important to me as a creative and as an artist. And liberty is important, right? And these are actually called the liberty values on that one. And even the more conservative ones, the traditional, there's something about the values of tradition, heritage. Promoting industriousness. Yes, I get that. So anyway, you begin to see like, oh, we have something in common there. I mean, obviously there's negatives too, and there's shadows parts to this. I'm just going to go on with these other two categories that are closer more to where I normally live. So there's the liberal modernists, and their basic values are, and these are called fairness values is what Steve calls them. They champion the working and middle class against big business. I mean, hello, that's like totally part of my value system. Protect the rights and interests of minorities and women. Yes. So you're starting to hear some of the things from working class and the 1960s human rights movement, right? Foster America's economic and scientific growth and promote its global influence. So this is part of the global markets. Promote liberal values internationally while limiting military force. Yeah, sign me up. And use government to ameliorate social ills and ensure none are in need. Yeah, this is the New Deal, right? This is FDR, right? It's like, yeah, we've been living in that for the last 80 years, right? 70 years, something like that. Okay. And then here comes the progressive postmodernists. This group of people really, really came online in American thinking and really are the ones who have shaped the culture since the 1960s. And their values are called the caring values. And first one is protect the environment above all else. The environmental movement was born really in the 1960s. Champion social justice and world-centric morality. World-centric morality is that we care about everyone on this planet. Not just the people in our country, not just the people of our skin color, not the Irish, things like that, or not even just the people in our own class. We promote feminism and LGBTQ plus equality, promote localism and natural lifestyle, so getting back to the earth, connecting to local markets, and expose America's past abuses and question globalization, which is important. Modernism ran amok and we went crazy. And modernism's, and we're going to get to the shadow in a second here. So these are the four main perspectives that kind of rule American politics. And part of what Steve and I, and why I wanted Steve on, was because I've been studying this integral philosophy for a while, and being practicing these witnessing practices where I can see my own self-deception. See, this is the part of the mindfulness practice that's important, is that we begin to see where we blindside ourselves, our confirmation bias, and all the other biases that go on. I'm not a big expert in that field of cognitive science and all those biases, and I'm learning more about it now. But I really am starting to understand that two things are happening here with these biases. One of which is we have them because they help us adapt, and they help us they helped us evolve. And yet at the same time, these very same things that are essential for our cognitive operation can also be used against us in self-deception. And that's the shadow, which we talked about with Genpo Roshi in the first episode, and I talked a little bit about in episode 2. So I'm just kind of weaving some things here together, because although these are individual episodes of podcasts, these are a worldview that I have been sitting in and working with in my own personal life, but think about also from the big picture. So there's the self-deception is the shadow part of us, the part that we don't realize we're seeing or doing. And what Steve and I were talking about in the episode was that many of us probably lean in one of these categories more or less. I'm guessing most of my listeners are probably the postmodern progressive people. We may have some libertarian people here, some really independent thinkers also, certainly liberal modernists. I don't know if I have any conservatives listening to me, but if you are, welcome. But that each of us have our own blind spots in these worldviews, in these political worldviews. And each of us think, if you're really entrenched in one and aren't able to do the bigger witnessing perspectives, each of us think that only we are right and everyone else is wrong. Now, I'm not going to go deeply into the shadow for each of these. I'm just going to name a few things, because I had a dear friend of mine, Paul Provenza, we were talking, and he said, I loved your episode with Steve McIntosh, but what do we do about the racists? He said to me, which was such a great moment, because then I was like, I need to figure out what to do with the racists right away. And so I started sending him links to things like that. But this is the one part that's hard for us who are very progressive and very much feel that everyone deserves a say in the world. We all do, right? That our circle of care is global. And so we immediately think that we have to go convince the racists. And something that Steve said very briefly in the episode was that, we're not everyone's going to come along. Not everyone can be talked to. And people who are determined on killing people based on their skin color or where they're from, don't know if you're going to have a rational conversation with people like that. But basically the point he's making is, if you are working with someone or in connection with a relationship with someone who is a conservative, they may lean towards some of these more racial identity politics, the complete opposite of racial identity politics in the postmodern progressive. But really the point is that there's those are the shadow aspects of that particular conservative point of view. And those shouldn't be, as Steve said, embraced and included as we transcend to the next level of thinking. Those are things that are not working for that perspective. And that perspective, if it can learn to take a bigger perspective, the conservatives, they would see that their circle of care gets wider. It's like how we always say, Christians are full of shit, because if they were really Christian, they wouldn't be voting for the racist because Jesus wouldn't be doing that, right? So it's really understanding that. So one of the things about this confirmation bias and any other kind of bias is that we each have our blind spots. And so for the conservative, socially conservative modernists and traditionalists, yes, there's definitely, if you don't look exactly like me and you're my gender, then you are beneath me. There's a real hierarchy that happens in that world. And of course, there's fundamentalism and there's anti-science and there's authoritarianism. All these things are bad. But one thing there is also is there's cultural bias and tribalism inside the conservative movement. And you can see that. Their culture, how they see the world is the culture that they think everyone should see. And they have a tribalism. It's my way or the highway. And then for the people who are more fiscally conservative and the libertarians that we were talking about, the libertarian modernists, they're, basically libertarianism run wild gross inequality would happen in the world, right? Because it was like, it would be literally the survival of the fittest. There'd be no circle of care for those who need it. They're very, very ideologically rigid normally. And there's a social Darwinism to it, which is pretty scary. But also, Steve puts in the list of the shadow stuff, the stuff that's not so great here, is cultural bias and tribalism for these people too. They see their way as the only way, and that it's and then we want everyone to be just like us. Then we go over to the liberal modernists, and some of their shadow stuff is, because they want to take care of everybody. Bloated government bureaucracy. This is the interesting thing about these times right now. I mean, bureaucracy is the fucking thing that's being dismantled by the strangest thing in the world, which is a billionaire who's been appointed to run the government. It's the lack of norms that's going on is insane, which for the conservative in me is driving me crazy. Like, rules are rules, people. This is where the conservative in me comes up. Law and order, rules and rules. We've got things on paper that tell us what to do. This is insane, breaking all the rules. But there is bureaucracy. I mean, we all hate government bureaucracy, and yet suddenly, because we hate Trump and Musk, suddenly we're defending bureaucracy. And I'm not saying that. It's interesting because it's like, I don't want all of the bloatedness of government, and certainly not the Defense Department, which is terrifying. But I also know that this is our system, and we've had it for 60 years, 70, 80 years. And you can't dismantle it in 2 months. That's the frightening part. It's the chaotic part of it for me. I mean, if we were all being level-headed about it, that would be very different. Of course, the liberal modernists are completely captured by special interests. And so this is the modern Democratic Party, I just want to say, So this is why the Democratic Party is falling apart too, because it has not been working either the last 40 years very well, or certainly the last 30 years very well, right? So both parties haven't been working well. Of course, it's crony capitalism and elitism. This is what happens in these runaway capitalism, right? So, but the other thing Steve lists here is cultural bias and tribalism. Once again, our cultural values are the most important, and it's our way or the highway. And then the last group here, and by the way, this is on page 54 of Steve's book. This is the progressive postmodernists, which I certainly fall mostly into that category. So some of my shadow stuff is seeks to dissolve all hierarchies. I have this fantasy of like, well, can't we just all get along? This is kind of the hippie, the hippie in me, right? Can't we just all just hold hands and sing some Crosby, Stills, and Nash? We'll all be okay. Really, it'll be fine. And who needs to be the leader or the boss? But of course, if you've ever run an organization or tried to have a meeting without a leader or a boss, you know how that goes. There's divisive identity politics. This is one that I've never been in favor of because political correctness has been on my radar since the 80s. And it's something that I've questioned. I think my father certainly instilled those values into me. So I've always questioned very rigid thinking around identity politics. I believe that everyone deserves to be safe and have equal rights and equal access to what everyone else gets. But trying to control people's speech, and this is the other part here, authoritarian demands and self-righteous scolding can be a postmodern problem. And so what's interesting is the postmoderns, really took over the culture class, and that means the media and the arts starting in the 60s. And this is really what the pushback is about, is some of this. And we saw it recently. We saw it in the last 10 years, certainly. And as Steve said, the right, the conservatives, hired Trump to be their kind of their bully, to be the one to kind of take down, knock down the elites, the cultural elites. And that's certainly what he's doing. But what's interesting here, too, is that Steve puts inside of this shadow box here potential deficiencies and pathologies, he calls them. Again, cultural bias and tribalism. Because it's our cultural values are the only values that are worthwhile, and it's our way or the highway. And so this is where we are in 2025 in American politics. And so this is why I really, really would love to be able to teach everyone in the world the ability to question their own thoughts, question their own positions, and do it from critical thinking and rational thinking. And of course, have your heart connected too. So this is why the witnessing practices are important. It's a start. It's a start to watching our own storylines and to watching our own storylines around what's happening. And what's really weird during these times is that it's such a intense and impossibly, excuse my SoCal lingo, gnarly time to be able to do this kind of a walk within ourselves and questioning ourselves, because there are people with power who really don't want to play the game anymore. And our system is broken. And when I do shadow work personally with people, or my own shadow work, and have worked with Genpo Roshi on this and other practitioners, part of what it is that we have to sit with our own participation in this. But it's really hard to do that when things are feeling very dangerous and we are living in a time that we've never lived in before. I put a post up on Blue Sky last week and talked about something that I think really, that my father was really, his frustration with us was very apparent, especially the last 10 years of his work. And that was that sense that we were not paying attention enough, and that we were asleep. That great quote of his, it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe in it. And really what we were asleep in, and really what's hit me as a 61, almost 62-year-old woman born in the 60s, raised in the second half of the 20th century, is that we had it good. And that we fought for human rights in the 60s and the 70s. And then the 80s came, and many of us watched the bullshit with Reagan. But at the same time, also, we all got very comfortable, because as long as things were basically stable and we were getting access to our goods and prices were stable and the government was mainly stable, people on the fringe had issues with things, but for most of us in the middle, we got really comfortable. And even at the same time knowing that we shouldn't be comfortable, but we didn't quite know what to do about it. I watched a little interview with Chris Hedges. Don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a journalist, great mind, written a bunch of books. I don't follow him closely, but and he talked about how basically the Democratic Party and what we've been living since the 80s is a corporatocracy, right? The corporations are in charge, and the Democrats are corrupt in that direction. And that's what the MAGAs don't like about them, which is interesting because they don't want to see the corruption of their own people, right? So again, we have these blind spots for our own self. So Chris Hayes, the journalist, had written something about how he's like, do you see the corruption that's going on right now? Why isn't everyone in America up in arms about this? Because everyone talks about corruption in government. And of course, we know why, you and I, because we've talked to Steve McIntosh now. We know that because we all have a cultural bias and a tribalism. So the people on the right, they're as long as their guy's doing the corrupting, they're fine with it. Same with us on some level. As long as the Democrats are doing the corrupting, well, we'll hold our nose, but we're okay with it. At least our other values are getting served, right? So he says, what's going on with that? And then someone wrote also, well, we've seen the rich and powerful in this country get what they want for over 40 years. At least it's no longer being covered up, right? And I get that too. It's like, yeah, it is pretty blatant corruption now going on. And so this is what I wrote, because this was kind of my come to Jesus moment. And I wrote, we've felt fucked over for years by the corporatocracy, but we had most of our individual freedoms, and we were actually growing freedoms, right? The LGBTQ2T plus people got more and more freedoms. We were slowly making progress with more and more human rights. Not a perfect walk forward, right? Like Steve and I said, it's not perfect. But we had most of our individual freedoms. They were growing on some level, and prices were stable. And here's the thing. We could at least pretend it was all fine. So for a long time, we did a lot of pretending. And I'm totally guilty of that. Like, well, at least I get a new phone every year. My dad and I used to talk about that, right? Like, well, at least I get my new Apple computer and my new BMW. That was my dad's two big things he loved. But then I wrote, and now that it's out in the open, this corruption, and freedoms are disappearing quickly, right? The scaling back of immigrant freedoms, transgender people's freedoms, women's bodies' freedoms. I mean, it has been a real contraction, no pun intended, of personal freedoms and autonomy freedoms in this country, which is insane because for libertarians, that's got to be driving them crazy. But nothing is stable now. The safety net is being attacked, and we're not quite sure if even our government is stable. Like, is the legislature even going to do their job? Is the judicial going to do their job against this executive power? And the thing is that the executive power grab has been going on by both parties for 30 years. But here's the part that's important, you guys. I wrote, we don't know how to wake up from pretending it's fine. This makes me think about the 1930s in Europe. You kind of like, we saw it all coming. We've been talking about authoritarianism since the first Trump administration. We know it's coming, and still we're not quite sure how to wake up from pretending it's fine. We've gotten so good at pretending it's fine. Like that little GIF, with the little dog sitting in the room on fire drinking his coffee. It's fine. This is fine. This is fine. We don't know how to wake that up. And I don't have a solution for you guys about this right now. I'm learning how to wake this up. But one way I do know is, one way, a couple of things here need to happen. A, you need to wake yourself up daily from pretending the bullshit in your own personal life. This is what witnessing practice is. This is what shadow work is seeing our own self-deception about what we pretend and tolerate every day of our lives in our personal lives, not even going to the collective at this point, just in your personal life. This is what I do with clients all day long, is what are you not seeing? What are you pretending is okay that is not okay, that gets you to wake up 15 years into a career or 20 years into a career or whatever it is. But the good news is that this is just an evolutionary impulse. We wake up at some point and go, oh, this is not okay. So we need to learn to wake up from pretending this collective political experience we're having is fine, that this economic way. And that's okay. But there's no blame here. We haven't done anything wrong. We've just been living our lives. We've just been humans with our personal biases and doing the best we can every day for ourselves. But we're in a moment, a beautiful moment where we get to take a leap together. So personal shadow work is important. Personal witnessing work is important. And the other part is community. And not community where we all get in our silos and just complain about those people over there, because that's what is wrong with American politics, right? Steve and I talked about this other level of thinking, this integral perspective, where you can see in all four of those categories that I talked about, you can see the positive values and, the shadow stuff too. And that includes your own group, your own grouping, your own alliance space. But that you get to see the values and the virtues in all of those people. And it really is the thing we talked about, evolution of this collective consciousness and this ability to see this, is that our scope of care widens. And for postmodern progressivists, the care has widened to world-centric, including animals and environment. And yet, fuck the MAGA people. Like literally that'll come out of a progressive's mouth. And you're like, wait a minute. I thought our circle of care was everybody. And so this is where my friend Paul Provenza comes in. He goes, yeah, but I can't fucking let the racist be in my circle of care. True. It's not like you're going to be kumbaya with everyone, but this is a intellectual exercise that can then become a practice, which means being in communities where we're willing to talk about our shadows and willing to see our self-deception and willing to learn from each other in ways and have dialogues with each other that is not about scoring points, but is about opening our hearts and minds and hearing from each other and really listening. And this isn't some sort of fantasy utopian thing. This is going on. This is the old Socratic dialoguing. This is what Socratic dialoguing is us seeing each other's self-deception and being kind and open-hearted and open-minded and being willing to learn from each other. And so that's why this guy, John Vervaeke, this cognitive scientist from University of Toronto, has been so amazing to me, because he's really bringing this kind of dialoguing back in a philosophical kind of high-level cognitive science. But he's very much, here he's a cognitive scientist who's talking about the sacred and the meaning of life, and also the actual spiritual, mystical experiences we have. It's the first time I've heard a cognitive scientist talk about this. Because, I'm a Jungian. I'm a Jungian imaginal psychologist who is inside of this space, is inside the mystical shamanistic space. So I'm thrilled about these. Like, he's crossing the barriers right now. So 3 things: witnessing practices, doing shadow work, and learning to be in communities that are wider than your comfort zone. All right? Okay. So that's my pitch for the day. That's my Ponderama. That's how I unpacked my relationship with Steve's ideas. Highly recommend his book, Developmental Politics. Also highly recommend Ken Wilber's book, The Theory of Everything, if you're interested in the integral perspective and what that looks like. Go find Steve McIntosh's website. I've got it on my other show notes. I'll put it here. I'll put his books down. I'll put the other integral stuff down. And I just want to say that this is my work in the world right now. If you're looking for a community to work on your own shadow work, to work on witnessing practices, if you're a creative or you're someone who's going through a time in your life where you feel like you're on the verge yourself, maybe with your career or relationships or empty nesting or your creative life or your spiritual path, I have a great community called Humans on the Verge. And we have all sorts of ways you can work with us, different levels of participation and different pricing points and different amount of support you get. But we have something called the Village. And one of the things we do in the Village is this thing called the Daily Practice. Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. Pacific, we have an hour. It's a co-working space. I use it to do my creative work. We encourage people to come do creative work. do your witnessing practices, maybe do some philosophical reading, maybe do some shadow work, whatever it is. And we also have ways to support you in these witnessing practices and this shadow work too. That's the work we do, basically. And of course, the deep imaginal stuff too, and basic life coaching and basic writing coaching. We have all sorts of great stuff in our space. So this is the work I'm doing right now too in the world. I'm trying to foster community. And there's a lot of like-minded people in there. Certainly, they're mostly postmodern progressives. There's a lot of creatives in my space. But I am here to push us past these silos, open our minds and hearts, and own all of ourselves and question our narratives. So if that's something that interests you, there's also a link in the show notes. We would love to have you. And keep breathing, you guys. Keep taking care of your nervous systems. Keep questioning your own narratives. Take care of the ones you love. Fight for what's important for you. Fight for the moments that are important. Rally the troops. We will have to do that. But pick your issue. Pick your issue and really stick with that. If it's freedom of speech, if it's immigration rights, if it's women bodily freedom, whatever it is, pick it and get involved in some ways, because that is important. Being a citizen is being important right now, okay? All right, that's my spiel. You guys have a great month. We'll be back next month with another Steve, Steven Eisenstadt, and we're going to talk about dream work and the deep imagination. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba